Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here with Ice Cream Fitness. And today I'd like to talk to you about upper-lower training splits versus push-pull training splits. Now I know I've already covered this video previously in one of my first couple of videos, but now that I have a little better equipment, I'd like to go ahead and rehash it out again. Um, and again, originally I came up with this topic because someone asked a question in my training log as to why I personally seem to prefer this type of split. Now, generally speaking, I think for most trainees, I'm not really a fan of split routines at all. I would really like to see probably 90% of trainees, people who lift, doing full body routines 3 times a week. I think splitting routines up is for those who are a bit more advanced, and oftentimes it's done more for psychological and organizational reasons rather than actual physiological reasons. Now, again, there are reasons why very advanced bodybuilders may do body part splits, and usually that stems back to the fact that, again, a lot of top bodybuilders are injecting enough anabolic drugs into their body that their muscles can grow for 5, 6, 7 days off of a single workout. But for someone who is natural or someone who only uses a few steroids, that's just simply not the case. And so they're not always going to make optimal gains on that in terms of hypertrophy. But I mean, even then, body part splits can have their uses even for the natural trainee, um, particularly the advanced ones. Now, that aside, if you're going to break away from a full body type routine, um, one of the earliest choices you'll be faced with will be, how do you split it up if you're going to go into a 2-day system? And again, I'd like to point out that, again, this is my opinion on it. I've got reasons why I support these ideas, but it's not the only way to train, and it doesn't mean that I'm automatically right. And I think there's more than one way to look at this. Um, First of all, I see a couple of problems with the upper-lower system that just immediately come to mind that you don't always have with the push-pull as much. And the first among those is the fact that it causes sometimes organizational confusion. A lot of trainees forget the fact that they're splitting a routine up often for motivational reasons, for psychological reasons. It's not always for physiological reasons. And so what will often happen is they get confused and they start asking questions like, particularly with some of the most effective mass building movements, things like barbell squats, deadlifts, push presses, or even heavy barbell rows. They'll ask the question of, wait, is this an upper body or a lower body exercise? And they actually get distressed and confused as to where to put it in their upper lower split. And when in reality it's really completely irrelevant. You're generally splitting the routine up for psychological reasons and organizational reasons, and then worrying about the physiological benefits or negatives of the way you're splitting it up is really kind of counterproductive, because you're not splitting it up for physiological reasons. So again, I think it can cause some confusion, as far as actually setting it up and figuring out what lift to use. And some people may actually shy away from some of the more effective mass builders because they don't know how to organize them in there. Whereas, again, if you're doing your routine based upon function in the body, pushing versus pulling, it's much easier to determine. Generally speaking, most people who do this are going to do all of their pressing, all of their squatting, anything like that on pushing days, any type of row, any type of pull up, chin up, or deadlift, good mornings, shrugs, things of that nature are all pulling in nature, so they're going to do them on their pulling days. And then oftentimes, again, their isos like biceps will go on pulling days, triceps on pushing days, because it just seems to really fit in and flow with that type of system. So it just generally works. One of the things that I also really don't like about the upper-lower system is that, again, when we're getting away from training a body part 3 times a week, and again, the upper-lower is generally, for most people when they do it, it's going to be 4 days a week, 2 upper body days and 2 lower body days. And what ends up happening is that you're not really hitting each muscle 3 times a week. And again, for most trainees, particularly drug-free trainees, and particularly those who are not very advanced, this is really problematic. They're going to make slower gains as a result of this slower frequency. So again, this is something to be concerned about there. Whereas when you go to the push-pull, you get a lot of overlap and splashover. What oftentimes happens is that, you might be squatting and deadlifting, on separate days. So you might have on, 2 squatting days on your pushing days, 2 deadlifting days on your pulling days. Well, both of those lifts actually work most of the thigh. I mean, to some extent, they would all use the posterior chain, the lower back, glutes, hamstrings, and they both use quads. So again, if you're doing those type of movements on those, you're really getting a lot of splashover back and forth. And the same can be said of the upper body days. It can, the same thing can happen. I mean, generally on any sort of press, whether it's a bench press or a standing press or anything like that, even though those are primarily, chest, anterior deltoid, tricep movements, they do use quite a bit of lat. And because, again, it's impossible to isolate one head of a muscle because they're using the front delt, there is going to be some carryover to the medial delt and to the posterior delt. And so, again, there's carryover, and it's the same with pulling movements, things like chin-ups, pull-ups. Yeah, again, they're primarily, rear delt, latissimus dorsi, bicep movements, but there's a lot of carryover. Again, what you'll generally find in EMG studies is that even the chest, even particularly the upper chest, gets worked quite a bit on a chin-up or a pull-up. So again, you're getting a lot of splashover. You're getting a lot of days to where even though you're not getting a full workout in some of those main muscle groups, other than their 2 primary days, they're getting secondary work on those other days, and that can be enough to keep the protein synthesis elevated longer so that you're benefiting to some extent from a higher frequency. And I think, that leads to, potentially a bit more potential for gains in muscle mass, using a push-pull versus an upper-lower. And again, I'm not telling you never to use an upper-lower training method. Many people have made great success using upper-lower splits. I mean, I've personally used them before in the past, and I actually made really good gains using them. And again, I know a lot of people who've made great gains on this sort of system. So I'm not saying it's a bad way to train by any means. I'm simply saying that I think for a number of reasons, the push-pull system tends to be a little better. I think it's just easier to organize. It's less stressful for those who get confused about where to put their different lifts, and that it offers enough splashover on the non-training days primarily for muscle groups that you can go ahead and keep protein synthesis elevated even though you only have 2 primary days. And I mean, that's pretty much my reasons for it. Well, let me give you guys a couple poses, a bicep shot. All right, and I'll talk to you guys next time.